So for good reason, whenever a new set comes out, a lot of people are touting the power of Ruby Sapphire to the point where a lot of people think it's going to be tier 0. I think that last set in set 6, Azeroth Sea, it definitely was one of the top decks in the metagame, if not the top deck in terms of its versatility. However, as we move into set 7, Archazia's Island, what I'm going to show you here is a variation of the deck which, after testing it a little bit, I actually think you may not want to play some of the things like the new Bell, which is crazy to say, but you'll hear me out if you watch the deck profile coming later. But some of these new cards are just absolutely ridiculous in the Sapphire deck. And we already knew this, but when you actually test it out, you can see that it just becomes almost like just such an oppressive matchup. Like it's almost unwinnable with certain decks. Regardless, though, here you're going to see me start off, win the die roll, go first, ink one of the new Tamatoas, play the new item unconventional tool, banish it so that I can play out my Bell, which is a 3-cost 3/3 body that I play for free by banishing an item. And then because I banish the unconventional tool, I get to play my next item for 2 costs less, which means I play out my Sapphire Coil for free. Now that is a lot of resources, 4 total resources out of a starting 7-card hand that I use up to get this play on turn 1. And it would seem like it's the busted nuts. However, you could see that if I didn't draw this Hiram here, I would actually be out of cards. And yes, I have a nice 3/3 body on board, but what else do I really have? Nothing, right? And against my opponent here, going with a tempo-oriented Mufasa deck, which is a fan favorite of mine. I know my friend is very well versed with this deck. I think he won a store set championship with it, and he almost tops Toronto DLC with it as well, being I think like 1 or 2 points away. So he knows how to play the deck very well, very well versed in it, and clearly he's setting up for a Rapunzel play, but the deck is just a little too slow. So here, I'm feeling comfortable to continue to quest with my Bell, get a couple of lore early, but now I'm out of cards after playing 3 different items and the Bell on board, and the Bell doesn't really serve much more of a purpose here, right? It's not going to be singing any songs or doing anything like that. Even if I don't draw an Inkable, because we're back on Fishbone Quills, I will be able to play out my Hiram on 4, but my opponent having the Gaston on 3 means that if they opted not to play the Rapunzel, they could potentially go into a Madame Medusa, which would be a problem for me. Now, I'm not going to quest with the Bell because much like what we saw last set with Tipo acting as isolation or insulation from those Lady Tremaines coming in, because that's another 6-cost card my opponent can play early with the, Amber ramp card in the Gaston. I do need to play around that, and I don't want to lose my Bell to what would potentially be also a healed up Mother Gothel, being a 3/4 body, running herself into my Bell, surviving, having another 3 points of damage for yet another Rapunzel. However, I did see my opponent ink a Rapunzel, and that's really good for me. The less Rapunzels they have, the better it is. And you're gonna see the skill, not the skill gap, sorry, the like the power gap in the decks. Basically, like Mufasa is still a couple of sets behind in my opinion, which is why in my set review for Amber, I was like really sad that Amber Ruby didn't get a dedicated draw spell, because I really have been seeing that, or saying that that's what it needs. But you can see the reason why. Like, in addition to Rapunzel, if they had another draw spell to keep their hand healthy, they can continue to play their tempo-oriented game. Otherwise, they do risk running out of gas. So here you see me exert my cards, and my Hiram living for an extra turn here, getting me an extra 2 is really good. And what's nice about this variation of Ruby Sapphire, if you go back to it here, it's very explosive. It can win the game in 1 turn, like what other Ruby Sapphire decks have done in the past. But you're much quicker and you're much more resilient now. You can afford to play things like Maurice's Workshop back in the deck for a number of different reasons, which, again, I know this is a long match, but I think you're going to want to see it to see all the cool interactions you can do here. But yeah, it is really interesting. So here you can see my opponent's going to opt to clean up my board, which is expected. I'm on 6 ink, knowing that I have the Be Prepared in hand. And I have a number of, well, not a number of, I have different draw engines in my deck that I feel comfortable enough with that I can say, like, yeah, I can lose my Hiram here, that's fine. In previous red-blue matchups, you would be like, no, I definitely don't want to be losing my Hiram. Like, I want to keep it as safe as possible. But here, I Be Prepared the board. I don't think my opponent did not have the Mufasa to insulate from my 7th ink, not necessarily turn 7, but my 7 ink to play that Be Prepared. But they probably don't care, because look, they have 7 cards in hand and I have 1. I do have a couple of items on board, or they had 6 in hand, sorry. But they are, not necessarily in a bad spot. Now, the Sapphire Coil is just, I can't believe they printed this card. You're going to see just really how impactful this card is over this match and the next one that I post up as well. I opt to ink the big Sisu instead of opting to ink the Tamatoa, which would have procced the Sapphire Coil to make the Mufasa a 1/3, which means if I would have opted to play out the Tamatoa instead, or sorry, the big Sisu instead of the Tamatoa, I could have wiped out the Mufasa, but then they would get the free play off of the Mufasa. My opponent looking really strong here with the Tremaine to take out my Tamatoa, and then they quest with Mufasa up to 6. Now I draw this Donald Duck, and let me tell you something, guys. I know everyone's hyped up about the new Tamatoa. If you watch my videos, again, I should be paywalling this stuff, but I think the Donald Duck is kind of nice. I'll just leave it at that. So here, classic Yu-Gi-Oh player brain, I didn't actually read my card fully and thought it was like a Grammatala Scry 4, but you can exert 4 items to play this character for free. It doesn't seem like you can play exert 2 items and pay it, and it reduces his cost by 2. The card does not say that. You have to have 4 items in order to play him for free. If you have 3 items, you have to pay the full cost for the Scrooge. You cannot play him for like 1. It's saying I'm exerting 3 items. So I have the 4 items on board. Great. None of them really matter right now because I'm not going to use these fish bones. I take 1, and my friend's like, no, you have to show me what you take. And I'm like, oh, Tamatoa. And he's like, no, you have to take an item. And I'm like, what? And then I'm like, oh, yeah, my bad. Classic, again, Yu-Gi-Oh! Player brain. But this works out really well because I take the Maurice's Workshop. And what's really nice about this variation is if you play the unconventional tool and you end up banishing it, your Maurice's Workshop now costs 1, which is actually crazy because one of the problems with Maurice's Workshop previously is you really didn't want to play it out for 3. It's kind of clunky if you do that, but playing it for 1 is actually really good value. Here you can see me cycle through a couple of items, pay the extra cost to draw the extra cards, and then I have a 4/4 body on board for free. I banish the Popsicle to play out the Bell, and then pass turn. So now I have challengers into both the Mufasa and the Lady Tremaine, and both of these characters cost me 0 ink. Okay, that is insane. Anyways, my opponent plays the Medusa on the Bell. Pass turn, we draw a Hiram. Any item or a Hiram now becomes a draw engine, and we play over 20 items in this build. So we play the Hiram, banish Popsicle, draw another Scrooge McDuck. I apologize if I called him Donald Duck earlier, but yeah, Scrooge McDuck and a Popsicle, and I'm just like, holy moly, okay, what am I going to do now? My opponent is on 10 lore, so I do have to be careful. I exert 4, keeping one of the only cards that exerting matters for in the Fishbone Quill up. And we pick up the unconventional tool here, putting some pretty good cards to the bottom of our deck, but that's okay. So we have 5 ink to work with still. I'm going to pay 1 and drop the Popsicle, and then okay, so what I'm doing here, don't make this mistake when you're actually playing, but similar to what happened with the Jesse Clement interaction in DLC Melbourne, where it's like, oh, you have to declare your triggers and what you're doing. When you play the Popsicle, you can declare, yes, I'm going to be deciding if I want to trigger the Maurice's Workshop, and I'm going to decide if I'm going to trigger Popsicle to draw a card. So both go into the bag, and then you say, I'm going to trigger Popsicle first. So I draw my card, and then now I make the decision on whether or not I want to trigger the Maurice's Workshop. So then I decide if I want to pay 1 or not after I've seen my card for Popsicle. Because you might see your card for Popsicle and say like, no, I'm not going to spend the extra ink. So keep that in mind, guys. Me and my friend here talk about this a little bit later on in this matchup here. But yeah, with the exerted the exerted Lady Tremaine, I'm going to be able to double Sapphire Coil down the Lady Tremaine to 0, so my Donald Duck takes it out for free, which is insane. Like, that's just insane to me. And then I still have all these items on board. I've got double Scrooge. I don't know if I keep calling it Donald, but I apologize. The Scrooge and the Hiram still on board. My opponent drops the Surfer Stitch, which is a great card historically. I was always a big fan of this card, but now, I mean, it's not a good look. And you'll see why in just a second. So the Medusa trades out the Scrooge McDuck here, and my opponent passes turn with an exerted Mufasa on 12 lore. At this stage in the game, though, I've got my Hiram up. I've got one of my workshops up. It's just like insane. So yeah, we quest with Hiram, banish the unconventional tool. I hope I remember that card correctly. If I'm mispronouncing that card, I can't see it on the screen here to read it at the moment. But my next item now costs me 2 less to play. So I'm thinking about what to do here. Again, you got to forgive me, guys. Like, I was new cards, you're thinking about them, right? You've maybe theory crafted a lot, but if you haven't actually like grinded out like dozens of matches, you're still going to be thinking through a little bit of your plays here. And I got to make sure that I adequately deal with my opponent's board here. So what I'm thinking through in this scenario is there a way for me to completely take out their board? So I reduced the Mufasa and the Stitch by 2, making the Mufasa a 1-3, and the Stitch is now a 2-8. Now I play the Sisu, and I instantly take out both. The Mufasa hits a Rapunzel, which is actually good for me, better than them drawing that Rapunzel and getting more card advantage off of it. But it is a 2-quester that my Donald Duck can't, my Scrooge McDuck can't take out. So we're going to go ahead, play the unconventional tool, pay 1 to draw off of the workshop, and we have double Tamatoa and Lucky Dime waiting in the wings here. We're going to quest for 1 up to 6, and my opponent still technically has an advantage, but we know we have the clutch factor in the end with that Lucky Dime Tamatoa potentially. So I'm going to go ahead and pass, and this Rapunzel will get them to 14, and they still have a number of good, like a pretty healthy hand size, a good hand size here. A number of options to play out. They drop another Mufasa and a Lumiere, and this is where you have to be really paying attention with that Lumiere on board as to how the interactions are going to play out with your Sapphire coil. So yeah, they're going to quest up 14 and pass turn. We draw a Maui, and this is how crazy red-blue is now. I mean, you saw Mauis get reduced or cut from these lists before and then reintroduced, but in these scenarios, you even got to think like, yeah, would I rather just go for the straight removal, because you get so much extra mileage now off of the strength-based removal because of Sapphire Coil. It's honestly ridiculous. So here you see me counting out my ink and thinking about a way to wipe the opponent's board. Basically, I'm trying to clean up their board of the 2 questers, which means the Rapunzel, the Mufasa, and whatever the Mufasa may hit. And so I have what I have on board right now that is able to challenge and do some stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and Fishbone a Maurice's Workshop, which is an interesting choice, but I mean, at this point, I'm not too worried about my card draw. I've got my Hiram off multiple times. I do have Maurice's Workshop up already. And I reduce the Rapunzel and the Mufasa down to, well, the Rapunzel down to 0, because the Lumiere puts it to 2, and then Sapphire Coil reduces it to 0. And then the second Sapphire Coil I have will move the Mufasa down to a 2-4 body. And so here you can see me end up making a mistake. Even though I sped up this footage, I'm still playing kind of slow, trying to think through everything. Trying to avoid a Mufasa hitting a, a Maleficent Dragon. I challenge with the big Sisu first instead of questing, which means that my Sisu takes no damage because the Rapunzel's at 0 thanks to Sapphire Coil. And then I try to play out Sisu, and my friend was like, no, the Lumiere makes it. It's not a 1-3, it's a 2-3. So he let me take it back. In a tournament setting, I would have committed to that play, and I would have definitely paid the price for it. So make sure you are paying attention to everything on the board state before you make your actions. I have to ink again to trigger the Sapphire Coils again, because again, I inked off Fishbone, I ink for turn now. And so I have double Sapphire Coil triggering multiple times a turn when I ink off Fishbone. And you can see how much mileage I get out of my Sisus. It's absolutely insane. The Mufasa does hit a Madame Medusa, which is pretty good there. But my Sisu is able to take out the Mufasa, so now they have 2 questing power on board. I still have a Fishbone Quill up, and what I could do, which is what I end up doing here, is inking the Maui, ending up not needing Maui, so that my Scrooge McDuck can take out the Madame Medusa without taking any damage, because the double Sapphire Coil will reduce it by 2 again. You could argue, why don't I just play out the Maui? Well, the Maui doesn't really do anything. I'm not playing any songs in this version that Maui can sing. Yes, he's a challenger, but my Donald Duck is also, my Scrooge McDuck is also a decent challenger at this point as well. Why not just continue to ramp up my ink? The Madame Medusa would actually only get reduced down to a 1-4 since the Lumiere is boosting it up by 1. So giving it -4 would keep it at a 1-4. So yeah, after much deliberation and just trying to look at the board state and configure everything, I finally decide to Fishbone the Maui and then crash the Scrooge into it. And then I do take 1 damage, but my opponent is now left with only Lumiere. I still got a ton of ink left, And I could opt to play Lucky Dime, but obviously it would make way more sense to play out the new Tamatoa, because I could play the Lucky Dime for free when this Tamatoa quest next turn, which is, again, I don't even know why they allowed that. Like, sure, make the deck even more broken. So yeah, double Popsicle back to hand, pay 1, play Popsicle, and I think I'm telling my friend here, like, yeah, the choosing of the triggers, I can choose the Maurice's Workshop after the fact. So again, guys, very important to kind of keep aware of these things and understanding how the rulings work. And I think my friend said he looked up the ruling at first, or sorry, after we went through this. But I think in this exact moment, we were talking it through, and we both discussed like the situation in Melbourne. So we were kind of just like, not reminiscing, but like going over like, oh yeah, like make sure we don't get like rule shark by this, make sure you sequence things correctly, which, in this match, I think I've already made like a couple of different sequencing mistakes. In the second match, I make even more because the board is so cluttered. It's hard to keep track of everything. I guess that's the difference between, tabletop play versus like real life play, or virtual tabletop play versus real life play. But yeah, we're discussing it here, and we're like, yeah, so I think he was looking up the ruling to verify. But yeah, it functions the same way. So I'm like, yeah, the trigger off the Popsicle, you want to see what you draw first, decide if you're going to exert the extra ink for the workshop, and then you can say like, yeah, I'm going to pay the 1 ink after you've seen the card you drew with the Popsicle, or you can say, no, I'm not going to. So here, because I have Hiram, I'm going to opt to not pay the extra ink for the Maurice's Workshop, banish the Popsicle, draw 2 into another Sapphire Coil and the original Tamatoa. And, my opponent not being on Be Prepared, being on Mufasa here, my board can just go super wide and set up for a 1-turn OTK, especially with that Lucky Dime. They drop another Mufasa, and again, like I was saying, you can just see the power gap between these two decks. And like Mufasa is living, a couple of sets ago basically still, and Red-Blue is just at the forefront of what's going to be a very aggressive meta. You're starting to lock down the board, and there's nothing really opposing decks can do. Aside from Amethyst decks that are able to gain lore out of nowhere without questing, those are the decks that would give Red-Blue a bit of trouble, for sure. But to be fair, there's also the Shark variations of Red-Blue that are still very viable if you don't want to go the item-heavy route here. So yeah, my opponent goes Lumiere. Now they got double Lumiere, so each Lumiere is a 3-2 now, and the Mufasa is a 5-3. But they only have 2 cards left in hand. They've used up most of their ink here. And I think they're debating if they want to challenge or if they want to quest. If they quest, they go to 15, but they leave my Scrooge up. Yeah, they're going to opt to challenge, and that's fine because they have no interaction for my Hiram, which means I'm going to be able to continue to draw. I already have 5 cards in hand now, 6, double Lucky Dime. This Tamatoa is going to quest me up to 9 here. I play the Lucky Dime for free, and then I think I need to count out 8 ink and drop Big Tamatoa. Big Tamatoa is then going to get dimed for, I don't even know, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8. And then quest with, yeah, I mean, that's game already. And quest with Sisu. And just like that, yeah, we end up taking that one. Again, we went first and we did have a pretty good opening, but maybe not as good as it might appear, like getting the bell on turn 1 and everything, because it didn't really amount to anything except for negative card advantage. So here we're just discussing the deck now and kind of discussing why Sapphire Coil is kind of like it's just an impossible card to deal with, really. You're going to see in match number 2 where my friend goes first just how insanely broken this card is. So if you made it this far in the video, thank you again for watching. Let's switch over to match number 2 in another video. Make sure you check that out. Thanks. Quantum is out for this one.